Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, Kirby Smart, the Georgia Bulldogs, they kind of showing the country why they are the number one ranked team heading into 2024. Absolutely routing this Clemson program. And I kind of have two takeaways. One, I'm not completely out on this Clemson team. I think that's a really good football team that just didn't capitalize on the opportunities. And I think we all know by now that if you don't play your best football against Georgia, like it's going to catch up to you. And it certainly caught up to this Clemson team in the second half. And I think, secondly, the version of that Georgia football team that we saw in the second half, if they play like that in the big games this year, I just don't think there's a college football team across the country that is beating them. And I think the fascinating part about this storyline is, they were down some difference makers on the defensive side of the football, and it just really didn't matter. Want to get into kind of some of the big takeaways around this football game, talk mostly about Georgia and kind of how they dominated, but I also want to speak on Clemson a little bit later on too. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, and they'll previewing this game for really the last couple of weeks. It's been a blast, and the amount of fan engagement, it's been super fun for us to talk football with you guys in the comment section. We appreciate y'all. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, I'll give you the T-box here. Big takeaways from Georgia, just kind of rolling week one.
I mean, that second half was kind of vintage Georgia. It felt like we haven't really seen them, I feel like, pound a really, really good team like that, or probably didn't see them do that last year. They obviously beat up on some teams like a Kentucky, like an Ole Miss, teams that were kind of beneath them at that time. I mean, they're certainly a better program right now than Clemson, or a better team than Clemson. But that Clemson team, as you kind of said, they're no joke. I think they're going to be really, really competitive in this ACC landscape, and especially in that second half, just the physicality Georgia started to bring, their ability to play with those linebackers and that defensive line, that front seven just taking over the game a little bit. That's kind of vintage Georgia that, I think a lot of teams really fear in this world.
Yeah, and we were talking for really the last couple of weeks, how does this Clemson offense get after Georgia's defense? And we were trying to get creative, but you look at that version of the Georgia defense that we saw in the second half, there's no way to get after this team, right? You want to run between the tackles right at them. Good luck doing that. They just out-recruit you along the line of scrimmage, especially on the inside of the defensive line, even being down some of their top players. And then you want to get it to the perimeter. You look at their linebackers. Every single linebacker that touches the field for Georgia saw a sub-11 second in the 100-meter dash. I mean, you look at how to game plan against this Georgia defense when they're playing that brand of football. I think it's virtually impossible. Dill, I think you hit the nail on the head, these linebackers. It's crazy to think that, CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson are only true sophomores. I'm kind of comfortable going out on a limb and saying in 2024 or 2025, that might be one of the better linebacker duos that you've seen in college football in the last 20 years.
I know, and that's what I was thinking, because I was even CJ Allen was the guy I was wondering if you'd see the play speed pick up. Not to say it was at all bad last year, but was it the way Channing Tindall played, or a guy like Nakobe Dean, some of those guys that really flew around? And I think he acquitted himself really well. I mean, he was going sideline to sideline. He's making plays on the perimeter. He's obviously controlling the inside of the box, as we always knew he would do. But his kind of next step in terms of his game speed, his play speed, that was big time football.
Yeah, you can tell he ain't no true freshman anymore. He is seeing the football field, what's going between his brain. The game is slowing down for him. It's probably the best way to put it. Malachi Starks with just Dill, you talk about Travis Hunter, and again, this is not a shot at Travis Hunter one bit, but you talk about Malachi Starks, that's another one of those special athletes that if he wasn't playing on Georgia, he certainly could be playing both ways.
It wasn't just that interception. I mean, that interception, obviously incredible.
The ball skill is nuts.
But also his work in the box. I mean, a guy who comes up, makes plays in the tackle box. He's just as dynamic as it gets. He's as complete of a safety as I think I'm pretty comfortable saying I think he's best safety in the last probably 5 years in college football. And that might be doing a disservice to him. You probably put him up with any safety ever. He's just for the last 3 years, and this year, obviously making the big plays, still doing his thing. He's really
kind of reminds you of what Kyle Hamilton brought to Notre Dame a couple of years ago. And Dill, you talk about the value of Malachi Starks, obviously down some guys in the back end, specifically Jonah Aguero. All right, Malachi Starks, we're going to play you at star. He's an elite star as well. And so you look at this Georgia defense and say it's going to be a special defense. It's going to be top 5, top 3, maybe.
You could probably put Malachi Starks out at the boundary corner, and he'd acquit himself really well. I think he'd play There's just nothing he can't do, and his ability to play man coverage from that position is just unreal.
Yeah, and then you look at the offense, and Dill, I kind of read the message boards at halftime just to get a kind of feel for how the fan bases are thinking. And Carson Beck was catching some heat on the message boards, which I don't necessarily know if I totally agree with. I think Georgia was playing it very conservative in the first half, and can you blame them? I mean, Clemson wasn't showing anything on offense that was really scaring this Georgia defense. Just don't make the crucial mistake, and you'll just be fine. But you go to the second half, Mike Bobo opens up the offense. I'll say this, Mike Bobo, the dude was in his bag all second half. I mean, everything that he dialed up worked. And I thought what was so fascinating is, again, you look at this Georgia front seven, that might be the best front seven Georgia sees. And I get they have a whole SEC schedule to play. That's how high I am on this Clemson front seven. What's one of the best ways to neutralize a front seven that's just freaky athletic? Get their eyes in the backfield. Give a little misdirection. What did you see in the second half? A lot of jet sweep motions, a lot of eye candy in the backfield saying, hey, it's really hard to neutralize you guys physically. We're going to try to neutralize you a little bit mentally, and some of that stuff worked. And I think my other big take,
if Arian Smith can be a legitimate weapon playing that kind of game, he's like a guy I feel like, I'm not gonna lie, I came into this year like, oh, we've been hearing about Arian
agreed.
Smith for a couple years now. Like, well, we can't just keep hearing. It's eventually got to translate where he's a game in and game out weapon for this Georgia team. And I think you're right. His ability to add that kind of uniqueness in terms of running jet sweeps with him, getting stuff to the perimeter and having him go to work and be really effective. I thought that was a big part of kind of them getting rolling a little bit, because Clemson's a hard team to just kind of smash on in the way Georgia's going to do to a lot of football teams. So I think once they started to get those linebackers going sideline to sideline and start, frankly, wearing that defense out a little bit, because there probably is a little bit of questions in terms of the eliteness of the depth in that Clemson team right now, I thought you started to see Georgia really take it over.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I would probably note is, well, two things. One, we were kind of asking the question of who would be the red zone guy with Brock Bowers going to the NFL. It was nice to see Colby Young touch that back shoulder fade. Like, I think he can be one of those guys when those throwing windows get a little tight. Like, just throw it up to Colby Young. He's big, physical. He did that stuff at Miami. He's doing it at Georgia. That was nice to see. I think, secondly, like, we had a big conversation around, all right, how does Georgia go about replacing Brock and Ladd? It was going to be by committee. We kind of said this all offseason. You look at 9 different pass catchers in this football game, 5 of which caught the football for 20-plus yards at least once in that football game. And so we talked about Kirby Smart clearly going to the transfer portal and trying to get a little bit more explosive in terms of pass catchers. London Humphreys showing up. Colby Young, not necessarily a 20-plus yard play, but we know he can do it. Showed up in the red zone. Lucky Lawson had one. You look at Arian Smith, he had a few. You look at this Georgia offense.
Bell's really, really good. Hopefully
he's
healthy, but he's a really good wide receiver for them as well.
Yeah, so it kind of is. And then obviously Dominic Lovett, who I do think probably still is going to lead this team in receiving yards when it's all said and done. Nate Frazier, we heard all fall camp. Like, all the conversation was going to Trevor Etienne, which I don't buy. I think Trevor Etienne's a great running back, obviously suspended for this game. We'll see how long that goes. Nate Frazier, we covered him, about 12 months ago when he committed to Georgia, saying this kid is just an all-around running back, one. And you kind of saw that. And when he has the football at the second level, which Georgia's offensive line is going to give him plenty of opportunities to get to the second level, there's just a little bit of a different juice to that kid when he has the football. I think there's a really good chance Nate Frazier is like an impact. Even when Trevor Etienne comes back, I think Nate Frazier is going to be a guy in this Georgia offense.
And he chews the yards up. That's like the one thing is everything's kind of going forward. There's no lateral. I felt like last year you saw a little bit too much of that, where their running backs didn't necessarily just get downhill and chew up yards in the way you've seen guys like Zamir White and some of those old or past Georgia running backs, I should say, kind of do it. And I thought Frazier looked a little bit more like that. It looked like he very much – I mean, he was getting every yard he should have gotten.
For a true freshman, ran the ball extremely hard. And that's the biggest growing pain you see for true freshman running backs is, hey, we got to get north and south. Nate Frazier ain't having no problem getting north and south. Going to the Clemson side real quick, Dill. Again, I think I'll go back to how I opened this up. I think Clemson has a very good chance of making the college football playoffs. You just lost to the best team in the country, so your season's certainly not over. And there was a lot of conversation that we had about this Clemson offense going into year 2 with Cade at the helm as a starting quarterback, going into year 2 with Garrett Riley. You have difference makers on the outside. Dill, I thought you saw some really positive things in that first quarter. They just had these crucial mistakes that you just can't have. When you want to beat the best team in the country, you got to be perfect, and you can't make those kind of mistakes. Yes, I'm very optimistic that this offense takes a step from the 2023 season. I just don't know if it was going to come week one against one of, if not the best defenses that we see in the country.
Well, it's not like they were miles away. I mean, Antonio Williams, like the guy you kind of are looking for Clemson to make a lot of plays, had a really, really nice football game for them. Cade made some really nice throws. I think at the end of the day, they just, what you kind of said, they didn't capitalize on their momentum early. They had some drives going that they killed off with bad penalties and some mistakes. And when you do that, and then Georgia obviously just started to possess the ball, it felt like for the whole game, or at least for a good chunk of that first half, and then into the second, and you just wore that defense out a little bit. If Clemson, again, I mean, their players, I think, acquitted themselves to an extent on the field, but at the end of the day, they can't have those penalties because they're not that good on offense to be able to like afford that.
And I was a little disappointed with the lack of verticality. Like again, it just seemed a little chunky in terms of pushing the ball down the field. And that was one of the things we said is going to take a massive step in the right direction. Now, granted, you're working against a really good secondary that has long and really fast defensive backs. Obviously, with a guy like Malachi Starks kind of ball hawking that center field, it's tough to push the ball down the field against this Georgia defense, but you didn't really see them try to do it all too often. I would have liked to seen TJ Moore, Brian Wesco, especially in the second half. Like, all right, you had one play plus the 50-yard line. Like, let the freshman cook, see what can happen. Obviously, it's not really happening with guys like Nolan or Troy Stellato, so let it happen with Brian Wesco or a guy like TJ Moore. I'm excited to see what this Clemson offense looks like against the defense that you have some more opportunity to attack, and then see if this Clemson offense can kind of build up to, if you see Georgia in the college football playoffs, can this Clemson offense be a little bit more firing on all cylinders and limit those mistakes? Because again, I think this game is a lot different if you don't have some of those penalties early in the game.
Well, they certainly keep it tight, I think. They keep it tight. I think they keep their defense off the field because their defense was flying around early in that game.
Defense is awesome.
Back, they were being very disruptive. Again, I just think when you're on the field that much against a team that's that physical in the way George likes to play, which, God, I just think must be brutal on opposing defenses because you got an elite offensive line. You have physical, heavy running backs. You have throwing a lot of tight ends. And you just can't be on the field that much. And that's where Clemson needs to be able to sustain drives. And I think they frankly would have sustained a couple of them early if they didn't shoot those.
Yeah, and you look at it's just a tough matchup, right? There's not going to be many teams on this Clemson schedule that can block up Georgia's offensive line. Georgia's one of those offensive lines that can block you up a decent. And you saw Peter Woods and TJ Parker get theirs, which they're going to get theirs on pretty much any offensive line you see. But that is one of the better offensive lines in the country. And so Clemson's defensive front couldn't, I think, swarm and dominate the game as much as you would like. We'll close it out there. We'll probably get into the film later on in the week, both for Clemson and Georgia. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if you all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all